sharing our journeys and our stories. And my name is Floyd Punitz, the president of SDA Kinship. And today it is my great privilege to welcome Stephen Chavez to the podcast. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great. So we've known each other for a few years, and but I'm not sure our listeners and viewers will know the name necessarily. So tell us just a little bit about where you're located and what you're doing these days.
Okay, well, I live in Maryland. My wife and I were just saying yesterday that we've been here for 29 years, and that's the longest we've ever been in one place in our married lives.
Wow.
We came here in '94. I came to join the staff of the Adventist Review as one of the assistant editors, and we've been here ever since. I left the Review about almost 2 years ago. I retired after 26 years on the staff, and so I've been retired now. And I thought retirement was going to be easier than this, but there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of things I'm involved with. I'm involved in our local Sligo church. I chair the administrative board. I'm one of the elders. I have a few more months left as a board member of the Associated Church Press. And I also do a little bit of writing for Adventist Today. So those are the things that are keeping me busy these days. Plus my role at Kinship International as church relations director.
Cool. Yeah, we'll get into all that a little bit more later on, but they need to rename the term retirement, because it sounds like you are even more busy than you were before.
Well, I'm having fun.
Okay, good.
But I don't have that much time to go to museums and exhibits and movies and stuff as I wish I did.
Yeah, I think the term seize the day or whatever, carpe diem, is true, because you don't know what tomorrow you're going to even be busier. So if you have an opportunity to do something today, do it.
That's right.
And tomorrow there'll be plenty of other things to occupy the time. So yeah, great. So let's go back. Tell me a little bit about, are you first generation Adventist, second generation, and where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Southern California, and on my mother's side, Adventists go all the way back almost to the Millerites. So the earliest Adventists, there are members of my mother's family in Battle Creek, way back toward the beginning. And on my father's side, I'm a third generation Adventist. I guess my minor claim to fame there is my grandparents were baptized by HMS Richards Sr.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so we're pretty devout Adventists. I've been through the Adventist school system, elementary, academy, college, university. And so I'm pretty entrenched.
Yeah. And you said you're still on the board or involved with Sligo Church. So right. Adventism is still a big part of your life. And
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah. Wow. So growing up in Southern California, so you went to schools there, and how did you meet your wife? Let's go for that.
Well, we went to La Sierra University, now university, and my wife and I met there. And we met in our freshman year, and we've been dating now for almost 52 years.
Awesome. Yeah. Keep that dating up. That's great. Yeah. So was she also from Southern California?
Yes, she was. Her story is interesting because she wasn't raised an Adventist. Her family moved to California from Michigan after her father watched the Rose Parade, in Southern California, and saw the sunshine. In Michigan, they had snow drifts and all that. So he said, time to leave Michigan. He went to California, and they lived for a while next door to an Adventist church. And so my wife, Linda, would see the kids, at Pathfinders and stuff like that, and looked like fun. She kind of gravitated there, and she eventually got baptized. And a friend of hers influenced her to go to La Sierra, and that's where we met.
Wow, that's great. It was like meant to be.
Yeah,
For sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. So in college, were you a theology major? Was that
Well,
your,
I intended to study like pre-law.
Mhm.
Um, but the spring before my freshman year of college, I just had this conversion experience, just a overwhelming feeling that I should study for the ministry. And having said that, it wasn't that I thought that I needed to just convert people. My intention was to be a pastor that was unusual. When I was growing up, pastors wore, white shirts and black ties. And a friend of mine said his dad was a pastor. He used to mow the lawn in his tie, wearing a tie.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to be a guy that just was kind of regular, down to earth, approachable. And so I've always kind of kept that in mind. I've always modeled my pastoral experience on that.
Great, great. So where was your first church?
Well, after we left La Sierra, I ended up in the Redwoods in California in a place called Fortuna.
Okay.
And it's about 100 miles south of the Oregon border, up in the Redwoods. It was a beautiful spot. And so we spent our first year in ministry there before going back to the seminary. Then I ended up in Stockton, California, and worked there for about a year. And then my first pastorate on my own was in the Clear Lake and Middletown districts in Northern California.
Okay, okay. So a lot of West Coast there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was there in the Northern California conference for about 9 years, and then I ended up in the Nevada-Utah conference.
Okay, okay. Great, great. So what brought you then to East Coast? Totally different scenery.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story too, and I'll tell it briefly. And that is that when I was in Nevada, I was in a small town called Fallon, and you know, it was just a small town, but you'd expect of a small town.
Mhm.
And the newspaper editor in that town had the bright idea of getting a Sabbath sermon or a weekend sermon from each of the pastors in the ministerial association. And her plan was to print 1 week a Methodist sermon and 1 week a Baptist sermon and 1 week an Adventist sermon. And we were just supposed to give her like a 2-page summary of our sermons every week. And then she'd take one off the top or take one off the bottom and then add one up to the top. So after about, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, me and the Methodist pastor were the only ones who kept it up. And then after a while, he dropped out. And so I was the only one who did it.
Uh-huh.
And so every week for, I think, close to 2 years, I had what they billed the Sabbath sermon by Steve Chavis.
Wow.
And it was, basically my introduction from my sermon, an illustration from the sermon, and then a closing conclusion. And it was very simple, but everybody read it. In a small town, everybody reads the paper.
Mhm.
And I'd meet people in the store. Oh, I saw your sermon. Or I meet people at the Rotary Club. Oh, yeah, that was a good one last week. And,
Great.
just walking down the street, people would come up to me. So it was kind of an interesting experience, but
Mhm.
it kind of got me used to writing. And I'll just say that if it weren't for computers, I wouldn't have done this because my typing was so atrocious. I couldn't, it would take me forever to go back and do the correct tape and all that stuff.
Right.
So thank God for computers. And in the meantime, I started doing a little newsletter for our congregations.
Mhm.
And I put a little pastor's note in there and I'd send it around. And some of those ended up in the office of the editor of the Pacific Union Recorder. And so sometimes he'd use them in the
Mhm.
in the recorder just as
Mhm.
a thing,
Yeah.
like a pastor's note or editorial note or something.
Mhm.
Then a friend of mine, Manuel Vasquez, who had been a vice president of Pacific Union, he came to the North American division. And when there was an opening for an assistant editor at the Review, he pushed my name forward to Bill Johnson. And because he had read my stuff. And so Bill
Mhm.
contacted me and the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow. Wow. So that's great. That's great. So that precipitated the move then to the East Coast.
That's correct.
Yeah. So how many years were you at the Adventist Review?
26 years.
26 years. 26 good years or 26
They were mixed.
challenging years?
Well, it's funny because I'll mention this now and we can come back to it later if you
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
But after we'd been here 5 or 6 years, I became more sensitive to the needs of the LGBTQ community and more sympathetic. And I don't know if that showed up in my writing or what, but at a certain point, some of my colleagues took issue with the way I was treating the issue. And
or that you were treating it at all.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was that began a period of time that was fairly challenging. And it just was, I wondered whether I would survive, whether I would make it. I am proud of the fact that I left the review, by choice. Nobody forced me out. But there were a couple of times when I wondered if that was the case, as things that happened behind the scenes that just made me wonder.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were part of several administrations and leadership roles and changes along the way.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that brings its own challenges too.
It did. It did,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to dig a little bit deeper. You said you became aware of the LGBT community and the needs and challenges there in the community. So how did that come about? Did you have a gay relative or close friend or anything?
I was so unknowledgeable. Like, as I look back in my high school and college years, I think to myself, I could have been so much more supportive to the people around me. But back in those days, the 60s, 70s, we just didn't, this just wasn't part of our reality. And even as a pastor, I regret, some of the sermons I preached. God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was when Anita Bryant was in the news and all that stuff. And well, anyway, as I became more adult and more mature in my faith, I realized that, as a pastor, you just have to be open to everyone. You have to just make them part of your circle. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I've told this story before, but at a certain point, some people at Sligo Church wanted to do an AIDS ride. And so I signed up because I enjoy a challenge. And you had to raise a certain amount of money, to do the ride. And I did. And I noticed in my ledger there, the number of people who were donated were people I never knew. I didn't know, they weren't my friends. I didn't know who they were, but they were a lot of people from Sligo Church, ironically. Mm-hmm. And they were sympathetic to the issue. And then after I did the ride, which was a great experience, I loved every moment of it. Some people asked me to come to their Vespers and give a talk about the AIDS ride. And so I agreed, and I showed up and I talked about the AIDS ride. They asked me questions. And then before the meeting was over, I said, well, let me ask you, who are you? And their answer to me was, if we told you, you wouldn't be able to talk to us.
Wow.
And so that was my introduction to kinship.
Uh-huh.
Kinship has been around for 40 years, but it was always, hovering below the surface, kind of. People who were part of kinship, was a great support, but outside of kinship, they didn't know what they could expect from the church at large. And so they always had to be discreet about who they told who they were. Mm-hmm. But Lynn and I got involved in kinship must have been about that time, back about 2000. And we've been deeply involved ever since. The local Kinship Region 2 is just dynamic, it's active, it's vibrant. We love everything about it. And it's just been a real blessing. I wish more people knew about kinship, because people talk about how in society you never know who your friends are, who's going to accept you, who's going to push you away. In kinship, everybody is so open, so welcoming, so inclusive. It doesn't matter who you are or your background or whatever you've done in the past. You're welcome at kinship, and that's one of
Yeah.
the things that we prize about it.
Wow, great, great. And we didn't discuss this ahead of time, but you're a perfect advertisement for Kinship Awareness Month, and that's October here. And we do want to raise the awareness, because for so many years, as you just pointed out, Kinship has kind of had to fly under the radar because of the harm and the hurt that they received from the church, and sermons like you talked about, the Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve types of sermons. And unfortunately, that's still happening in a lot of places. And so, in October here, we're trying to raise the awareness of kinship, letting people know that we exist, and just what the challenges are for LGBT people. So we definitely appreciate you doing that. You talked about the ride. Now, was this a bicycle ride or a motorcycle ride? A bicycle.
No, a bicycle ride.
Okay.
I got into motorcycles later.
Okay.
It was a bicycle ride from Norfolk, Virginia to Washington, D.C., about 300 miles.
Wow.
And it was such a blast. I mean, you run into people of all faiths, all ethnicities, all gender orientations. And it was just so eye-opening. I just had a blast.
Great. Yeah. Well, you love physical fitness anyway. I know you're also a runner. Is that not right?
That's right.
Yeah. So you participate in lots of marathon type of runs and things. So
Yep.
so yeah, very good. Great example of the health message, the Adventist health message there. So yeah. So you got involved with kinship there locally in what we call Region 2 in the DC Baltimore area. And so yeah, and found a welcoming community there. Okay.
And then about that same time, I got involved in the Kinship Advisory Council, which is a group of heterosexual people in the church who meet once a year in person, and then often via Zoom. And we talk about how we can be supportive to, the LGBTQ community, just as rank and file members of the church. And the members of the advisory council, they're in leadership positions. They're they have a strong sense of justice, and I've really enjoyed the association with that group over the years.
Yeah. What is the kind of the goal or the mission of the advisory?
We want to, the overall goal is to make the church more accepting and inclusive. Unfortunately, we have to do that underground. It's like the church is not ready as an institution to accept gays and lesbians and transgender people as part of their general membership, with very few exceptions. I mean, there are some exceptions around the country, and we appreciate those, but the institutional church just has a long way to go. And so the advisory works to think of opportunities where we can make an influence. It's an uphill slog, man. It's not something that's going to happen easy. In this day and age, we think that because of mass communication, stuff like that, you can push a button, send a message out to everybody, and you can, but the people who receive it may or may not be open to reading it or responding in a positive way. So it's challenging.
Yeah.
But I will say that members of the advisory council, um, we we try to keep their names confidential because we don't want any repercussions to them or their careers or their families. But they operate on some of the highest levels of the church. You know, you have um, college and university professors and administrators and uh, union conference, local conference people. We're just so proud of the work that they're doing.
Mhm.
And it's just one of those things where you have to, pave the way for, generations to come to reap the benefits.
Right, right. Yeah, the council members, they're kind of plugged into the heartbeat of the church and know
Exactly.
what's going on and what the directions are. So in your prophetic talents, quote unquote, when do you think the church will be ready to hear such a message? Because you said that it's really not ready to talk about that even right now.
Well, the tragic thing about the church is that it's often the last one to get on the bandwagon.
Mhm.
When during the civil rights movements of the 1960s, um, society was grappling with these things, and very few Adventist churches were involved in that process. And only when it became untenable for the institutional church to say, hey, we don't believe in racial equality, did they finally say, okay, well, fine, we'll sign on.
Mhm.
But that's so frustrating because you'd think that a church that's dedicated to justice and equality and um, just all the principles of fair play, you'd think they'd be first to jump on, but they're often the last. And what's even more maddening is they often use scripture to defend their position.
Mhm.
So, you had people, well, back as far as the Civil War, people were defending slavery because they had it in the Bible.
Right.
And now people are trying to defend discrimination against gays and lesbians and transgender people because of what it says in the Bible. So you just have to hope that at a certain point, people wise up and just realize that this is an issue that's not going away, and that they, in order to be relevant, they have to be part of the constructive problem-solving part of the issue.
Yeah, there needs to be dialogue, and that's what's missing. Yeah, and the frustrating thing is, originally our Adventist forefathers were on the cutting edge. I mean, we were out there trying something new and talking about things that no other church was really talking about back then. And it seems like we've settled in to this really smooth rut that we're in, and it feels comfortable, and we're not willing to realize that there are rough edges on both sides that we need to address.
That's right.
And so yeah, yeah. um so yeah, what can the church do, you think?
Well, the church, I think in some parts of the church, there is a move to get back to our prophetic roots. And by prophetic, I don't mean foretelling the future. I
Mhm.
mean prophetic in terms of righting wrongs and pointing out inequalities. You read the minor prophets, Amos and Obadiah and Habakkuk. Those guys were fearless, man. They just went after the religious establishment. They said, "No, you're not. You're not God's chosen people unless you do what God asks you to do." And Isaiah, Ezekiel, all these guys, they had a prophetic message, and their message was, do what God asks you to do. Don't get sidetracked in all these fasts and all these things that you think is going to earn you points with God. Do what you have to do. And so they were advocates for the poor, for the oppressed, for the marginalized. Um, and the church nowadays doesn't have that vision. It doesn't have that prophetic voice. Like I say, in a few places that's true, but in general, you don't see that in the institutional churches. Either it's public proclamations or it's public publications.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't know what's going to make it change. You know, frankly, society is changing so fast And it seems like, the people who are part of the LGBTQ community, they're everywhere. I mean, they're in sports, they're in movies, they're on the radio, on entertainment. And the church thinks somehow it's a virtue to say, well, those people are all wrong, and we're not going to get involved in that. Narrow is the path that leads to salvation. But at a certain point, you just have to realize that if the church continues to debate the rightness or wrongness of this issue, they're just going to alienate a whole bunch of people, and they're just going to be on the wrong side of history. You have anti-discrimination laws that are built into almost every state now.
Mhm.
And so at a certain point, our schools and our churches are going to run up against that. And what are they going to say? Well, in the Bible, it says this. Well, they're just making the Bible more irrelevant to the people who don't place that much confidence in the first place.
Exactly.
So it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
the church,
it's inevitable.
yeah.
The
And the
church
church
has
is
to change.
proud that it can discriminate against these. I mean, the Title IX, now we have Andrews and La Sierra who have an exemption to Title IX, a
Really.
legal exemption. And, the church, I think, is trying to promote other of our universities and schools, institutions to seek a legal exemption to Title IX so that we can, discriminate
Yeah.
openly.
Yeah.
I think kinship needs to be more like the prophets that you just named, the Obadiah, the Amos, boldly stand up for what we believe is right, and let the church know that we exist. We're not trying to come into the church. We're already in the church. We're just having to sometimes be very quiet about it and closeted so that we can worship and do what we feel is right within the parameters. But yeah.
Well, it's complicated, but in a way it's not. It's just a matter of right and wrong, justice and injustice.
Right.
And
right.
so, like I say, and I've said many times, and you've heard me say it many times, we're on the right side of history.
Mhm.
And history, like Martin Luther King said, it's a long arc, but it always trends upward.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
What's frustrating is just that it takes so long to get the attention of people in the church. And we're fortunate to have a few churches around the country that are just really open to this issue. The Glendale City Church in California is one of them.
Mhm.
The San Luis Obispo Church in California. You and I we met with leaders of the Whole Life Church in Orlando, Florida, a few months ago.
Mhm.
That was just such an affirming experience, because they're committed to this work in their local congregations. And that's, I think, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Mhm.
The highest levels of the church, they want to pretend like there's no issue, that this is not an issue, that everybody who's a Christian is heterosexual.
Mhm.
But that's not true, and everybody knows it's true, but they think if they talk about it long enough, it'll just go away. What's going to happen is the local churches, that's where things change. That's where things happen. And a friend of mine says he never goes to a church as a preacher without saying something, either in his sermon or in his prayer or in his informal comments before or after the sermon, where he says something about our gay and lesbian children. And he says every time he says that, someone comes up to him afterwards and says, oh, my grandson is gay and I don't know what to do, or my granddaughter or my daughter, And so it's just a thing where, the local church, they're the ones that are grappling with it. People there, they're the ones who have friends who are gay. They're the ones who have children or parents or whatever who are gay.
Mhm.
And the beauty of it is, with acceptance comes the greatest Christian virtues, grace and mercy and justice. When you ignore those things, you become closed and you become bigoted and prejudiced. And so when people open themselves up to accepting other people who they might not necessarily agree with,
Mhm.
they experience this grace in their own lives. And it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My challenge for pastors and church leaders, especially now Kinship Awareness Month in October, but to do this throughout the year, is to mention LGBT people in sermons, in prayers, pray for us, in a positive light, and that God will watch over us as well, that type of thing, and just that sends a signal to the congregation that you're a safe person to come and talk with
That's right.
and to share with. And so I
Yeah.
think that's very important. In your role with Kinship as director of church relations, what does that mean, and what is your goal or your duties in this role with Kinship?
The reality is different from the ideal. The
Okay.
ideal, I wish I could grab every pastor by the collar and say, all right, get with the program. But the reality is that um, I don't have much influence other than just, getting in touch with people, on a personal basis and trying to talk to them and make them aware of the gay and lesbian and transgender people in their congregations. Um, you know, I think most people at heart are graceful. They want to be accepting, but a local pastor, they have a million things on their plate, and so they can't dedicate themselves entirely to this one issue.
Mhm.
But if they're aware of the issue, they can at least, like you said, make it part of their weekly communication with their church, whether it's by a newsletter or a sermon or just an announcement.
Mhm.
Um, my great fear is that people who make this an issue in their local church will experience a backlash from people who are ignorant and misunderstanding about the issue. And, I've seen churches split over issues less significant than this. And I don't want to, the church shouldn't be a battleground. It should be a place where people get together and share common interests and common values. And, but like I say, inclusion is one of those values that I think is important to Christians.
Mhm.
You look at the ministry of Christ, there's nobody that he pushed away.
Right.
And even the religious bigots, he had harsh words for them. But if
Mhm.
they came and wanted to have a conversation, he always agreed to talk to them.
Right.
And so we don't lose anything by being open to conversation and to just sharing our views with other people. If anything, it makes the church a better place.
Mhm. Exactly. Generous donors sometimes determine what direction the church goes to. And then at the same time, with that goes pastors are sometimes afraid of their conference presidents and leaders, who are afraid of their union leaders, who are afraid of the division leaders. So, the fear and the pressures on the shoulders can really be great for a pastor. And so you as a pastor, a former active pastor, but still a pastor, um, what do you tell, what would you, what advice would you give to pastors who want to learn more, or who might be affirming undercover, but are afraid to step out and actually say something out loud to someone about it?
I would say my counsel would be to identify someone in your local congregation who is sympathetic to this issue, somebody who has a gay friend or a gay relative. And I would say to that person, I would get together with those two and say, let's go out to lunch. Let's talk about this issue. What can we do in our local church to make this issue more of a, not a hot button issue, but just a priority in our local congregation?
Mhm.
Um, and then just kind of create a network of people who are accepting. It's just, you're aware of the fact that there are only a half a dozen texts in the Bible that come out against this issue, and they can be interpreted in other ways. As you know, Alicia Johnston's book, The Bible and LGBTQ Adventists, she does a great job of interpreting those texts in ways that, yeah, there it is. She does a great job of interpreting those texts. I mean, it's scholarly, but it's not, over the top. A layperson can understand it. They may not be able to read it quickly, but they can go through that and understand her main points. And, it'd be great if in a local church, a small group of people could get together and go through that book. I know a lot of churches that have book clubs. They discuss, the Desire of Ages or Steps to Christ or Mere Christianity or something like that. If they wanted to get together, not even on a Sabbath morning, but on a weekday night and go through a chapter a week or something like that, I think they find it very rewarding. Because what people have to understand is that the Bible doesn't, the Bible isn't like a law book. The Bible is more like a case book. And so, you can read the Bible, you can defend bigamy, you can defend slavery, but if you look at it on the basis of grace, people come to me all the time and say, well, I want to be loving and I want to be accepting, but I can't get past this verse in Deuteronomy. And I said, well, how many times did Jesus quote that verse? And was Jesus' message primarily a message of judgment, or was it a message of grace? And for me, grace wins every time. And so I just encourage our members and our pastors to be gracious in the way that they deal with this subject. Make sure that by the time they finish, they always end up talking about grace. And that means, acceptance of even those we don't agree with.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, we have a lot of work ahead of us, and I thank you for helping us in that role as church liaison to help bring awareness to the church. If pastors feel they want to speak with someone, are you available to talk with them?
Absolutely.
Great.
We have the Adventist SDAkinship.org is our website, and there's a way there to get in touch with the church relations director, and any of our officers. They can get in touch with people there, or they can leave messages and they'll find their way to the right person. Exactly. But we don't want to be a secret. We want to be open. We're not afraid of conversation. We're not afraid of dialogue. We want to be part of this process that makes the church a safer place for LGBTQ Adventists.
Exactly. We want to stop the bleed of people leaving the church over this and other issues, and we want to create a safe space for them to be a part of both their Adventist beliefs as well as their beliefs of either being or supporting, affirming the LGBT community.
That's right.
So yeah.
And what's neat is that the younger generation, people in their 20s and 30s and teens, they have no issue with this. They don't care about, anybody's sexual orientation in general, unless they've been indoctrinated by their elders. Yeah. But people go to high school and college and their friends are gay. And so they're not going to, create a big issue in church. And in fact, if their elders make a huge issue out of it, that's all the more reason for them to say, well, I'm checking out because I don't have time for a religion that deals in bigotry instead of in grace.
Exactly. Well, great. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today, Steve. Do you have any final parting words? You've given us a lot of wisdom there, but any final sentence or two of parting words?
Well, just always end with grace. Grace is, the great healer. Um, you know, Christians have gotten a reputation of being harsh and judgmental. In fact, Gandhi said, I have no problem with your Jesus. I just have a problem with his followers. And
Exactly.
so we just have to make sure that our practice reflects our faith in Christ.
Exactly. Exactly. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
we thank all of the people viewing and listening to us today for coming along with us on this journey with Steve. And we invite you to check out a little bit more about SDA Kinship if you are not familiar with it. We're happy to have you join our ranks, our organization. Just go to sdakinship.org. And you can click on the join button there. You can also find links to Alicia Johnston's book on how to order that book. We also still have the offer for the free copy of the Unclobber book there if you'd like to also have that as a resource. And check us out on social media at sdakinship.org and on YouTube at sdakinshipint. And we wish you a great day, a great week, and many blessings. And join us next time for another episode of Kinship Connects. Thank you very much. And remember that God loves you unconditionally, and don't let anyone stop you from